Welcome everybody to the panel Data Protection and Big Data. What about regulating big data analytics? My name is Rosamunde van Brakel and I'm a researcher at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and I'm also a daily manager of CPDP. I will be chairing this session and I will be introducing all the panelists, and then I will give the word to the moderator of this panel, who's Dennis Broeders, who's up my left, and he's a professor of technology and society at Erasmus University Rotterdam and senior research fellow at the Netherlands Scientific Council for Government Policy. Next to Dennis, we have Daniel Druer, who's head of the data protection office of the European Police Office, also known as Europol. Next to Daniel, we have Professor David Lyon, who is director of the Surveillance Studies Center at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada, and also research chair in surveillance studies. On my right-hand side, we have Helge Veum, who's director and head of audit and security in the Norwegian Data Protection Authority. And next to Helge is Babak Akhgar, who is professor of informatics and director of the CENTRIC Research Center at Sheffield, Hallam University. Dennis.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for turning out here in such great numbers. People are standing, so we're going to try very much to be entertaining, so it will be worth your while. I'm going to give a little introduction about what the panel is about, and then I'm going to hand over to our panelists, who have all agreed to do sort of short pitches, sort of 5 to 10 minutes, that will leave us room for discussion amongst ourselves, but especially also with the floor, which is you. So current discussions about big data so far has mainly revolved about the question if the current focus on data collection and purpose limitation is still valid, is still applicable, is still working, and whether or not maybe we should move to sort of regulating the use of data. And we thought that in these discussions actually fairly little attention has been paid to the possibility of regulating what we call the phase of the big data analytics. Whether that can be regulated, where it should be regulated, and that's sort of an open question that we start off with. So the analytics phase is basically what comes between the collection of data and the use of data in the sense of what you might call actionable knowledge. So if you have the data, then you're going to do something with it. Nobody just gathers data for the sake of it or analyzes it for the sake of it. It has to lead somewhere. So to a certain extent, the analytics phase has been sort of a black box of technology. It's very hard from the outside to sort of see in. And that also means it shields increasingly very important characteristics of what's going on there. So what kind of data, how do you weigh the data into each other, what kind of algorithms are used, and what kind of human and automated choices are made in this process. On the other hand, the analytics are vital in directing the official actions and decisions. They lead to decisions. It's not just for its own sake. So the question we would like to explore with you, and I want to stress that this is sort of an exploratory panel, we don't really know, but it's an open question. Okay, is it possible and is it advisable to regulate what could be considered sort of the heart of big data processes? So what do we think about sort of the algorithms, the categories and the profiles that are usually operating under the bonnet of the car that we don't really see, but have huge outcome? I also want to stress it's not just about risks to privacy, which is of course a big emphasis in this conference, but it's also about bias, it's also about possible discrimination, it's also about unfair treatment on the basis of probabilistic statistics. And this is, we think, especially relevant in the field of law enforcement and security, where the consequences of big data analytics for citizens are potentially the most severe. I mean, this is the place where the citizen meets his government in the form of the holder of the legitimate use of force. And it's also an area where transparency about what is going on is traditionally limited. security agencies, but also law enforcement, are not very keen on sharing much about the method of operations, and that translates into the digital age as well. So the main purpose of this goal, the main goal of this panel for us is to start a discussion about regulating big data analytics, which may or may not include forms of transparency, either direct, but that will probably be limited, or indirect, forms of oversight, so what is possible, what could be needed, ideas of algorithmic accountability perhaps, so how do we hold algorithms to account if they play such an important role in the process, and sort of about the nature of possible safeguards. We have 4 speakers with you. For you, I think we have a very interesting spread of speakers, also globally. We're all from different countries, so we score on that one, I think. It's limited to, well, limited. We try to demarcate it to the analytics phase, and we try to demarcate it also to the domain of security, so law enforcement, also security agencies, but that will be more difficult. And the speakers all have sort of their own angle on the issue. I will shortly introduce their angle and then give the floor to them. So starting with David Lyon, who is an academic, who is a professor of surveillance studies, a founder of the genre, I think, and who will mainly probably be talking, because we don't really know, about the social and societal consequences of big data. So more on the question of why do we need regulation than on the regulation itself, probably. Daniel Drewer of Europol, who is in the field of law enforcement. Europol is obviously a big hub of information exchange, of information analysis, and he works also from the angle of data protection, but within a law enforcement organization. Helge Veum from a DPA perspective, so a regulator, oversight, so what are his possibilities now, and where does he see things lacking, or are we good? And Babak, lastly, who will bring a technological perspective to the table, not just from his knowledge of the technology itself, but also from the fact that he has designed systems for law enforcement agencies, so he knows the particularities of both the technology, but also what his contractor, the people he works for. I will moderate. This will be the longest that you've heard my voice, hopefully. The talking is mostly for the panelists, and I would now like to hand it over to David to start his pitch.
Thank you very much for your welcome. I'm very happy to be here. At least I was, until I heard that entertainment is apparently in my brief. I wasn't told about the entertainment part, and you may be disappointed. So, it is not only the collection of data capture, but what is done with those data that seem to me to be the critical question. So let me take you back. A couple of years ago now, one of the Snowden documents was released. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Mr. Snowden's work over the past couple of years. And this showed the ways that the NSA, and its partners presumably, tracks social connections, and in doing so uses a colossal cache of data from telephone calls and email logs. And they create sophisticated graphs of those social connections so that they can identify their associates, their locations at certain times, their traveling companions, other personal information. We were also told at the time that the NSA enriches these data with material from other sources, so material from public, commercial, bank codes, insurance information, Facebook profiles, passenger manifests, voter registration rolls, location-based services, property records, tax data. And all these can also be stored for later use, by which they mean analysis. And of course the idea, purportedly at least, is to find out who might be directly or indirectly a contact in a contact chain connected to someone with a foreign intelligence interest. But the question is, what does the NSA do with their data? They say themselves that they are using new generations of advanced software tools that revolutionize data collection and analysis to develop portraits of individuals, perhaps they say more complete and predictive of behavior than could be obtained by listening to phone conversations or reading emails. And this allows them to examine the friends and associates of those whom they are tracking, detect where they were at a certain time, and so on and so forth. And it may pick up all kinds of sensitive information, including religious, political affiliations, psychiatric information, extramarital information, etc., etc. And what this story tells us, it seems to me, is that security agencies are tracking everyday activities and communications. Yeah, we knew that. And how they do it, using telephone and online information. But secondly, that the data collection activities are really only the backdrop to the analysis of those data. Then thirdly, that they're trying to find out about individuals and making profiles, and also relationships with others, communities of interest, in other words, as well as persons of interest. And this is big data valence. And then lastly, it's not just the data collection that is problematic, but the ways in which they're analyzed that leads to the production of so-called threat level ratings and such, being assigned to different peoples and groups. Practices that appear in some cases to be highly discriminatory. One of my own PhD students is examining in detail the experiences of people who go through Pearson International Airport in Toronto to discover from the point of view of those travelers what their experiences are. And it is so blindingly clear that people with brown skins are systematically, disproportionately taken on one side for extra questioning, and so on. So there is something going on in the analysis that produces the watch lists and so on and so forth that somehow reproduces certain kinds of usual suspect kinds of conclusions. Big data practices, it seems to me, can very easily reinforce discrimination. Now, Dennis said we were to speak primarily about policing security methods. I should point out that there are extensive literatures already on the ways in which these practices can reinforce social, economic, all kinds of discrimination that already occurs, whether through Google advertising or, well, I'm not going to go into those because those are not the security and policing ones. But again, in Canada, and from another Snowden revelation, in fact, about Canada, a program called Levitation, which taps directly into internet cables without using the companies at all in their search of so-called radicalized youth. And that, too, appears, we haven't managed to look at it in great detail yet, but it also appears to be reproducing certain already existing inequalities of treatment, discriminatory treatments. So the sort of thing that we're talking about, big data valence, monitoring of citizens on the basis of their online data, goes beyond what we might conventionally have thought of as surveillance to the continuous tracking of data and metadata for unstated, preset purposes. And Jose van Dijk has done interesting work on this. As I said before, it's threat level ratings that are being determined through these modes of analysis. The data mining technologies are providing all kinds of information for policing and security purposes within the policing world. Things like predictive policing, PredPol, is supposedly predicting times and places for future crimes, using billions of commercial records in order to rate groups and people on red, yellow, green threat level ratings. So much for blind justice. It seems to me that there is a lot of prejudgment by algorithm going on. Because in a sense, and I go on to the next main point, perhaps foreclosing the future is what is happening in this black box, as Dennis called it. The data predictions about individuals and groups may be used, it has been said by more than one person, in effect to, as it were, punish people for their propensities and not for their actions. As I say, this extends to general policing, identifying potential future criminals, directing patrolling to areas known on the basis of analysis of historical crime data, records of arrests, known social networks of criminals, and so on. And in such a case, the person's data shadow no longer merely follows them, it precedes them. It's there first, seeking to police behaviors that might never occur. And as soon as you have that proactive or preventative kind of measure coming out of such analyses, it makes a real difference to the situations in which they are applied. They too have ethics, have politics, and so on. This is what some call statistical rule, that is both discriminatory and depoliticizing, because simultaneously they frequently want to do away with that which should come between the data and the political discourse. Sometimes, of course, it's done commercially in the name of public opinion. So Google or Airbnb or Uber will want to get the public on their side and sidestep the political process. And it seems to me that we're in danger of something similar to this in the area of preventative policing. So the supposedly race-blind, gender-blind, class-blind magic of computers, mathematicians, big data, is one thing. The truth, it seems to be much less, to me, to be much less comfortable. The anticipatory governance that is happening increasingly, a term that's used by Antoinette Rouvroy and others, predictive analyses are being used to assess future likely behaviors and to direct appropriate action. And in this preventative prediction, it seems to me, the presumption of innocence is the first casualty. So surely if there is a case for regulating big data analytic practices, it has to begin here. Thank you.
Excellent. In my opinion, excellent. Both entertaining and short. Very good. Thank you very much. Daniel, you're up.
David just asked me if he gets now another minute because I showed him the 1 minute sign, but no, it's my turn now. Get that back. It's for me later than it. Yeah, good morning. My name is Daniel Drewer. I'm the Data Protection Officer of the European Police Office. I would like to start by congratulating the organizers for the success of this panel already, because I see that the room is completely full, and my suggestion would be for next year to be in the big hall next time. So big data, big hall, big audience. But okay, well, I'm grateful for the invitation for me as a law enforcement representative to participate on this topic, which is indeed of importance for the work of law enforcement, not only at Europol, but also beyond Europol. I agreed this morning, very early this morning with Dennis, that I can say 2 minutes something about what Europol does, because maybe not everybody is aware what Europol is. It's the European Police Office. The mission of Europol is to support member states in preventing and combating all kinds of serious and organized crime and terrorism. The collection of Europol, the collection of data is at the heart of Europol's operational activity. What we do is, in our headquarters in The Hague, is the processing of personal data and strategic data that's provided to us by national law enforcement authorities, not only within the EU, but also beyond the EU in the cooperation with our third-party partners. Europol has a robust data protection framework, and it is, for us, it is an obligation on the one side, but also an asset to our work. And at the same time, of course, it brings for us a responsibility in the way we process personal data, and because a very detailed and concrete and strict legal framework needs to be put in practice and applied in our day-to-day operation, also if we talk about large data sets that are provided to the European Police Office in the fulfillment of its mandate. So we have indeed, the panel is about big data, we have indeed large amounts of personal data stored in our files that we hold in The Hague. These data is provided by national police forces for us, and it's analyzed by our experts and analysts, and we exchange the analysis results with our partners within the European Police Office and also with the police forces in the member states and third parties. For us, it's important that in this data processing operations, the highest data protection safeguards are applied, and of course, security and the safety of the data is the other leg we stand on when it is about the protection of our data. We live up to this responsibility. If you have further interest in details of data protection at Europol, I would advise you to have a look to the Europol website. Yesterday, on the occasion of the Data Protection Day, we launched an e-magazine on data protection at Europol, and additionally, you will also find an invitation to a data protection conference on encryption that we will hold at Europol in May this year. Coming to the topic of this panel on big data, well, there's a popular constitutional common law principle that says everything which is not forbidden is allowed. We all know this is not applied, that we cannot apply this when it comes to data protection. And so far as it is necessary for the achievement of Europol's objectives, the organization may process information, including personal data, but only for very specific purposes as laid down in its legal framework, and as has been beforehand agreed with our supervisory authority. Just as the general importance of employing sound data protection safeguards is without question, there can be no doubt that effective police work requires top intelligence. The legislative challenge in the area of law enforcement is therefore to create a framework which balances the fundamental interest of freedom and security on the other side, also when it comes to activities related to big data analytics. In the case of Europol, it was clear from the beginning that the tailor-made set of rules when it comes to the processing of personal data has to be created, which effectively takes into account both the operational needs of Europol on the one side and the fundamental rights of the individuals that are affected by this data processing operations. In response to this challenge, the legislator gave Europol a very specific data protection framework, but if you have a look to this framework, at this point in time, you will not find the term big data in this framework. It is simply too early for this. And the technical developments, as we saw that during the last years, always goes far beyond that what the legislator is able to provide in time. So to stress this point, in our current framework, the legislator emphasized that specific provisions on the protection of personal data are essential for Europol because of the particular nature and functions and competences of the European Police Office. How important are big data tools for the work of law enforcement and security agencies? In the law enforcement context, it can be applied that big data supports a different approach to gathering intelligence, namely on that it is not necessarily targeted and hypothesis-based, but focuses on gathering as much data from as many sources as possible. This big data supports a data-driven approach to identifying and exploiting patterns and correlations among the data collected, an approach known as what David already mentioned before in his intervention as predictive analytics. Predictive analytics reveals correlations, so the what, but is usually not suitable to explain causality, so the why. Sometimes it's important to look for causal relationships, particularly when it comes to the investigation of crimes. As big data analysis is usually unsuitable to answer the question of the causality, it may create more challenges for investigators to produce supporting evidence given the sheer amount of data that needs to be analyzed. On the other hand, big data analysis can be used to point law enforcement to the most promising areas of investigation. It's also about resources allocation of law enforcement when it comes to the analysis of this data. In order to do so, law enforcement should be in a position to effectively combine evidence from different forces and to present it in a meaningful way. There's, however, and there I agree with that what David said, there is, however, a risk connected to this, and the risk is that the use of big data might be incorrectly or excessively. And that, of course, a data protection principle that has to be obeyed to. It is therefore important that law enforcement can only use or should only use the analytical tools provided proportionally and in line with the legislation and regulations. The question whether Europol is processing at this point in time big data is a matter of definition. It can be implied that Europol is specifically performing intelligence analysis on the basis of particular targeted queries at this point in time. But what I see from my function as data protection officer, looking at how big data is now defined, there are two areas where the use of the big data is beneficial. The one is in the area of cybercrime, fight against cybercrime, and the other area is when we talk about open sources information or open sources intelligence. Generally, in the law enforcement context, big data analytics are important but cannot be blindly relied on. Big data analytics can be applied, for instance, to extract insight, understand criminal patterns more efficiently. But, and this is a big data but, big data analytics cannot, with perfect precision, predict or in any way prevent criminal behavior. Do I think that this will increase in future? Well, I think we all know the developments. Big data will probably become bigger than it is now and also faster and form part of most decision processes. So big data analysis will continue to be used, among other things, for data-driven security, for instance, when looking for, now I got your, for instance, when looking for criminal patterns in real time. The modus operandi of transitional serious organized crimes indisputably requires quick and effective preventive response. Big data can certainly assist law enforcement agencies and authorities in making connections and detecting patterns to analyze criminal conduct. Europol, as our activities are foreseen in our mandate, are undeniably at the heart of criminal intelligence. Europol does recognize that the rapid pace of development of modern information technology allows for the continuous improvement of analytic processes and tools. This is what we do. And the toolbox of the analyst for the pre-processing phase will certainly expand in future. Do we need a different regulatory framework? Well, if you look now at Europol's council decision that governs our activity, the term big data is not mentioned, but all the principles are there. So if we talk about processing of large amounts of data at Europol, we have to obey to these principles. And generally, when it comes at Europol to the technicalities of the detailed data processing, they are described in our policy framework, but they are not described in the council decision, simply because technology advances and we are still with the legal framework that we have that will change in 2017. So just to conclude from my side, so law enforcement needs the necessary expertise and tools to perform open sources analysis and big data analysis to identify relevant criminal patterns and collect crime-relevant data. As it will become harder to collect and analyze the ever-increasing amount of electronic evidence, there is a need to develop and share guidance, procedures, and best practices for law enforcement on how to conduct investigations involving big data. And this is one of the tasks of the European Cybercrime Center that took up its operations last year at Europol. I think at this point I'll leave it like that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Excellent timing. I'll give it over to Helge. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for this panel, and thank you for showing up this morning. And also thank you for the dimensions already. I'll just follow up on a bit of what you just said. And I think I would like to reinforce that this is a topic that goes outside data protection. There's a lot of ethical questions into this discussions. In our big data report in 2013, we looked at some of this, both, as already mentioned, the discriminatory actions by law enforcement, also the data determinism, where decision predictions actually will shape the behavior of the data subject, when we are subject to change because of big data analysis on us. Also, the chilling effect is a vital part of of our society. And echo chambers, when we lose the actually important thing of internet, being exposed for other opinions, other thoughts than our own. There's things we can lose by the effects of big data. These are important cornerstones of a free and democratic society. And this society is possibly threatened when we look at how we can protect by enforcement the same free and democratic society. That's the reason this is a very, very important discussion, and it's bigger than privacy, but privacy is an important part of it. I'm going to watch myself for not talking too long, so I'll just do the short version first. The question is, should it be regulated, and how could it be regulated, and what should be the DPA's role? My main thought is the general approach from the soon-to-come new regulation, the General Data Protection Regulation, will apply and will in most cases be sufficient for big data outside law enforcement. And we will need some special regulation outside the General Data Protection Regulation and big data processing that's interfering with fundamental rights of freedom should be regulated firmly. That's my thought. And as comes to the DPA role, the DPAs shouldn't sit and evaluate your algorithms. There's no that kind of big DPAs in, at least not in Europe. We should evaluate how the controller, how the businesses, how the police actually work on compliance. How do they do the appropriate self-evaluation? How do they implement and embed privacy into their solution? And how can they demonstrate compliance with the regulation? So, some general thoughts on big data and regulation. As already mentioned, I think the general regulation should apply and will apply. We will have the system of prior consultation, and that will be valid for big data as well. And there's no exclusion of the analytic part of it. The analytic part is a part of the processing, so we will come into act when the controller has to evaluate is privacy treated in an acceptable way in our processing. So I think with that big data analytics is regulated in the general terms. We have expectations for the industry. We have expectation that the industry will work with code of conducts, that it will work with standards, that it will work with technology development, that we can embed privacy into big data in a good and proper manner. And we've seen that from CDP and the discussions previous these days, that there are development in how we can actually deploy privacy-enhancing technology into big data. And that's important. And that's also a reason why we should stay firmly on the importance of withholding the privacy principles, also in the area of big data. This is terms of, for example, audit logs, automated use of audit logs, even applying big data on the big data deployers, and filters limitations built into the systems. That's the general thoughts. We will have other forms of special regulation as well outside the data protection area. For instance, what's happening directly towards consumer might be regulated through fair consumer behavior regulation and so on. The press have some good self-regulating bodies that should be relevant if the press starts to form actually shaping of news content based on big data. Is that the ethical responsibility? And to what extent should you shape news content based on big data analytics? Another area for special regulation, possible self-regulation, is research. Also a lot of other ethical questions than privacy. So, the need of special regulation. In general, I think we need special regulation where processing seriously affects the individual rights to freedom and integrity. When it comes to public sector analytics, of course, when it's focused on the individual, for instance, tax control, so on, and those working on individual sensitive data in public registers. Even though they're aggregated through big data for management and control, it should be regulated. Then, finally, hitting the edge of the discussion here today, law enforcement. Of course, for the ordinary law enforcement, police, tax, fraud, so on, methods and sources should be regulated in order to give the population adequate level of predictability. We just touched the secret services, and they're not the biggest part of the discussion here today. Naturally, we can't know everything what they're doing, but more important than any area, we have to make sure we can have an open debate on the mandate and the powers of the secret services. That's essential in a democratic society. So we have to have sufficient amount of transparency and debate of what power we're giving those services. And of course, we need oversight panels and bodies. That does not have to be the DPAs, rather not. That's that's better if someone else is doing that. And then in a bit more general thoughts on how we're looking at this in Norway. In the area in law enforcement, we have from the Norwegian DPA side made a call that our government should appoint a temporary committee for privacy in the sector of justice. And we think that this committee should evaluate the current state and give guidance on how we should move forward with a balanced approach, safeguarding our free and democratic society, safeguarding our privacy, but also making sure we have a safe society. So the short question in this would be, what rights of processing should we give the justice sector, and what control mechanisms should we have? And this is very, very natural, because in our lives and in our communication, we leave vast amount of digital traces, and they're growing exponential, and they're naturally of interest for law enforcement. And we do observe a never-ending call for new methods and access to new data. And these are, in our point of view, not balanced enough. And that's why we need this committee to guide us through the balanced way. At some stages, I have to admit, we sit with the impression that finally every citizen can be analyzed and held responsible for their possible unlawful actions. That's not the society we want to live in. Today, the technical means are accessible so that the police can investigate my everyday digital life in order to discover possible offenses that can be compared to the police doing house calls without explicit grounds. So we should also be tough enough and look to the side and compare the digital world with the physical world. A lot of this we would not accept in the physical world. And also, the data access rules of yesterday opens more invasive investigation when mass collection of data is done, and these data are being screened with tomorrow's technology. And finally, of course, and I'll stop now, the justice sector is important for our society, and the law enforcement shall have access to invasive processes of personal data. The topic here is to find the right balance in between withholding privacy and making sure we have the sufficient tools for law enforcement. And that's why we, in our point of view, need a committee to look at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helge. Babak, if you could do the last introduction.
Good morning, everyone. I tried to do the entertainment. This morning I've had a hell of a time coming here. Middle of the night, woke up. I checked into a nameless hotel in Brussels. Hello, this is your 10th time here. Yes, it is. Also, we discover you like the room with the city view. Is that correct? Well, I'll never tick anything in my reservation to say I want to have a room. But apparently, somewhere in a comment list, which I put in a website, they managed to extract that I like a room with a city view, using your big data in action. And then in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., I've heard a big bang. And I thought somebody's coming to my room. I opened the closet door, and it was my suit completely wet because the upstairs, the pipe broke down and the water dropped too. So you could have a good entertainment coming here with a bathrobe, but unfortunately, or fortunately for you guys, this didn't happen. My work in my center is predominantly looking at application of big data in criminal investigation, intelligence, and combating organized crime and terrorism. Currently, I think we got about 10 live projects. When I say live projects, these are multi-million euro projects. And when I got invited by colleagues to have a pleasure of sitting next to this distinguished panel, I thought, let me go back to my project documentations and see what were the core requirements from law enforcement agencies to requesting to have this big data capability. Why bother? Because it was fashionable, because all these software vendors come and try to sell them something useful, or there was something else behind it. When you look at the core requirements of law enforcement agencies to adapting big data as a capability, there are a set of characteristics which shared among most law enforcement agencies, whether they are at national state or European level or international level. Our extraction say they want to have big data to gain competitive advantage over bad guys, whatever you define the bad guys. They constantly dealing with a large volume of data set in different format, different speed of change, all the 3 V's which we all know about the big data: velocity, volume, and variety. They need capability to deal with that. That was another requirement. The third requirement, which Daniel mentioned, the application of open source intelligence. More and more, I think somebody, a deputy head of US Department for Homeland Security, I think he mentioned 90% of the all intelligence out there are available as open source. Law enforcement agencies need to capture these open source intelligence and process it and create actionable intelligence. Also, another reason when we're receiving requirements from law enforcement agencies is related to data visualization. We got so much data, high in God's earth, we're going to visualize it in order to make our frontline officers make an action or understand these data. So they use big data analytics to visualize large volume of data. This is a golden one, which is fantastic. Enhance our decision-making capability. We need big data analytics in order to enhance our decision-making capabilities. The next two is more fashionable. In the past 2 years, we've managed to secure 2 major consulting contracts with 2 nameless law enforcement agencies related to predictive analytics and also situational awareness. But these are, again, 2 key fundamental requirements which usually law enforcement agencies go after big data analytics. If I want to sum everything, they need to have knowledge in order to make a decision, and they believe, law enforcement agencies believe big data analytics can provide them with this capability. In terms of industry-led solution, doesn't matter what solution you look at, what industry, and I'm not going to name any specific vendor. There are some common characteristics in all industry solutions in terms of how they're applying big data in context of law enforcement agencies. First, it's about capturing data. We want more. We need data about everything, everyone at any given time. Then the next step is cleaning those data. Well, we collected all this data and then see what we can do about it. The next step, which most industry solutions deal with them, is about extracting information. We collect information about people in this room. Now I need to know who are the individuals, what is their hobbies, where do they travel, how do they travel, have they been to any specific location which I may be interested in the next 2 years on it. And then, again, recently, specifically related to cyber-based investigation, discovering the links and network. If I'm a friend of Daniel and Daniel is a friend of somebody else, How do we find the association link? Can I use big data capability to discover that most industrial solutions are going to identify those links? But from the regulatory point of view, every time we talk about big data, the notion of proportionality, of course, is important. We all know how important when we're capturing data, it has to be proportionate. But also, there is a small c, contextualization of the data we're using. Is it relevant? Is it pertinent? Is it necessary and proportionate? So these are qualifying factors which I always add to it. About a year ago, with a colleague in RSM, where Daniel is working, we conducted a small study research on people's perception of use of big data and surveillance. It was fascinating discovery for us, not because of publication. Since Snowden revelation, more than 60% of individuals, I think we interviewed about 1,000 people, they claimed they put a false information on any web interaction they have. They change their gender. Are you male? No, I'm female. How old are you? I'm 21, actually I'm 45. So they keep falsifying this information. Therefore, they're making the life of law enforcement agencies more difficult when they're using open source intelligence extraction. So how do we deal with that? But the critical point, to the credit of law enforcement agencies, we ask citizens, ordinary people, at what juncture would you agree that law enforcement agencies to conduct either surveillance or using big data analytics? Every time LEAs can prove the action they're taking is related to discovery of terrorist activities or child sexual exploitation, nobody put any limitation. Come and collect any data, any context, at any time. And we had this statistical proof, at least based on the data we collect, and I'm not saying it's a huge evidence base. My final comment, have I got time for one final comment?
1 more minute.
Excellent, before I get. I was talking to my colleagues in military, and they said, well, we don't know, you guys are mad. You got a fetish for collecting data. In military, since I think Alexander the Great time, we were using intelligence. And the way intelligence works, I'm sure you all seen it. First we plan, we direct, we decide why do we want that intelligence, then we go and collect the data. Unfortunately, on big data analytics, something gone missing. First we collect, analyze, then we decide, okay, what we're going to do about it. This is something quite important. If we go back to the original premises of intelligence collection, decide why we're collecting the data, we plan for it, and then we execute the analytical capability. And after that, I'm shutting up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all these talks, which have been very, very interesting. I was thinking after the pitches that I would just sort of reap from what everything was told and sort of be able to sort of answer a first question, which was about, okay, do we need big data regulation, which is not really the case. If I start with a few remarks, so the last remark by Babak is, okay, we should go back to the basics. Are we letting basically the possibilities that we have dictate how we look at these authorities? Helge is saying, well, we have a fairly robust framework and we can fit it in, but on the other hand, we need a little tweaking here and then, which is also what I get from Daniel. I mean, there's a lot in place, but we need to think, because of the added possibilities, we need to think about what we do and how we regulate this maybe a little further. And I'm also not really certain that David's mind is now at ease after hearing all of this, that the threat, you said so much for blind justice. I think you stand by that by that rule. So maybe start quickly with David. I mean, are you reassured? Are you thinking, okay, this is regulation in action, and they're tackling the right problems?
I'm not going to answer that question directly, but it does seem to me that as I listen to my friends in the panel, that there are certain things that are still maintaining what you call the black box, Dennis, and things that we don't get to hear about in terms of the details of what's going on. I mean, I should say that I personally am not wanting to make any kind of blanket condemnation of data analytics for these purposes. I too am. I find myself in a position where I'm profoundly affected by every terrorist attack. I'm not at all enthusiastic about most criminal activity. So, you know, it's not that I'm somehow a friend to those that I think we agree need to be discovered, apprehended, and so on. So I should say that. Neither do I think that it is necessarily the case that somehow we should be prohibited from using certain kinds of data analytics for these purposes. So I'm not saying that at all. And as you're probably well aware, Edward Snowden takes exactly the same position. He believes in the activities that he was employed to do at the NSA. He became profoundly disturbed by the excesses, by the ways in which certain things were being done that were actually against the rules of the organization, that were unconstitutional and illegal. So, you know, there were specific areas, and so I think one needs to distinguish. And one of the issues I think here, and I'd love to hear how my colleagues work this through. It was mentioned that there are software vendors, for example, who are wanting to sell their wares within these contexts. Okay, fine. However, how we think about prediction in relation to data analytics does differ depending on what sort of prediction is there, whether it's consequential prediction, whether it's preferential prediction, or whether it's preventative prediction. And it seems to me that the first two...
You may need to elaborate a little on those three.
Okay.
I know them, but it would be good to sort of pitch them
so
shortly.
the first two have more to do with the commercial sphere, where you are helping people to determine within a range of possible consumer choices what their preferences might be. And we could ask all sorts of questions about how Amazon and the other Big Five and others like them operate those kinds of things. And there are separate ethical questions for those. But the point that I'm making is, I wonder how far the possibility of transferring one kind of prediction to another area, namely law enforcement, security, and so on, happens without a consideration of exactly what is going on. Because when you come to preventative prediction, what you are trying to do is not increase the options of the subject of the surveillance or data valence. You are trying to reduce the options of that person because you're going to put them on a watch list or something like that. So I think there are black box questions that we need to ask about where those data analytics come from in the first place and what they are geared to. There are questions, I mean, we talk about these things as if the technology was out there. The technologies aren't just out there, we make them. There is no such thing as raw data, for example. Raw data does not exist. The only data we know are cooked, in the sense that we already have a means of determining what data are in the first place. We can't say that they are raw, so there's another black box there. And then when it comes to the actual analytics, we have to ask questions about what is inside the box. So while obviously I am in sympathy with the idea of trying to control crime, reduce the chances of terrorist attacks, and so on and so forth, we still need, it seems to me, to go inside the black box and ask questions about how we are actually making those choices about which data analytics, what sorts of prediction, and so on and so forth. That's the sort of thing that concerns me, and it's the sort of thing that I've been especially exercised about since the Snowden revelations. In the book that I made, the Surveillance After Snowden book, I spent a lot of time talking about the ways in which those revelations did not merely reveal that somehow more information about us was being collected. No, that's not the point. It is how it is being collected, and that, it seems to me, is still the black box question.
Can we maybe get a small comment from Babak, who makes black boxes? So, I mean, you obviously can't spill everything, but can you give us a little, because from the outside it looks like a black box and there's a lot of things going in there and a lot of things being cooked in there basically, and it is something that we wonder about. Okay, how does that work? Who really knows how it works? And the people who are working with it, how much do they know? So how much is it guided by sort of the vendor options that are there? So could you maybe elaborate a little on that?
Actually, I hate talking to that. Can you hear me in the back? No? Okay, no. That's it. So you'll have to suffer with me shouting again.
We can hear him.
I mean, if you look at this notion of black box, again, the vendors usually don't provide too much degree of customization for law enforcement agencies. At best, they say, well, we can flick this switch and you're not able to use that functionality. But from law enforcement agencies, any predictive model, whether to predictive crime, safety of a neighborhood, the next wave of terrorist attack, and I've seen some completely weird predictive modeling as well, the next wave of whatever is coming from these people who weigh between 65 kilogram and 120 kilogram, and they got a purple hair. Yes, you can get those completely nonsense. But from LEA's point of view, most places which I had the privilege of working with, they look at the relevance of the predictive modeling, how proportionate it is. If we want to stop antisocial behavior in a street, you don't need to capture people's DNA and blood type and social media profiling to stop antisocial behavior. It has to be proportionate. And also the notion of measurability, how measurable it is. For stopping a terrorist attack, in my opinion, there shouldn't be any limitation on that. For a major cyber issue, no. It has to be complete. You need to collect everything to identify it, and based on the context of your work. But the black box, we do not get the luxury of manipulating the algorithm. All the vendors which I'm working with them, that's the algorithm you get.
Okay, so there's a black box inside the black box.
There is a black box inside the black box.
Back to Helge. You said we basically have what we need to look at processes like these in terms of the data protection regulations. So how do you look into the black box inside the black box?
Hopefully the black box has a transparent lid.
Well, talk to your neighbor.
As mentioned previously, it's for the regulators and for the DPAs, the principles has to be set. The principles of, as you mentioned, the threshold, proportionality, and so on. When can we use what kind of methods? The DPAs won't have the effort to go into detailed evaluation of the algorithms or the black box inside the black box. But we have to stand with, from the regulatory side, what kind of measures can you use? What should be the threshold? For instance, preventive predictions. What kind of criminal cases can you use that for? As already mentioned, terrorist attacks, so on. Of course, you can do a lot more than for more everyday red light offenses. So I'm not sure if that's the perfect answer to this question. I don't think it exists. But we need to make sure the controllers, the police, self-do their evaluations and self-do their consideration in proportionality and document and make sure they're compliant. And we will control the controllers.
All right. I think we have a whole room full of people who will going to try to help us with this. But before I go to the floor, I want to have one more question for Daniel, because you said at some point, when you talked about correlations, which are not the same as causalities, and you say, okay, it may also create new problems for Europol in terms of sort of what are we actually doing and how much information do we have. You also talked this morning about basically the amount of information that is flowing into Europol is vastly increasing. And that sort of struck a note with me with what Babak said, is okay, are we not sort of letting the possibilities getting the better of us? Because he said in the end, he said, okay, intelligence can also start with, okay, we need to know this, and then we go and search for it. But with police, and I talked to quite a few policemen, usually they say more is more, they don't say less is more. So they want more. So how do you relate that sort of to sort of almost the DNA of the policeman? It says, okay, more information is always better, with sort of the targeted question, which may be better than data mining the information because we got it.
That's a good question, and I think we have to differentiate here. Of course, I cannot talk for the whole law enforcement world, so I can talk about my experiences, and I can talk for that what I know as data protection officer of Europol. I think there are differences here to make. The one part is if you talk about a policeman saying, I want everything that is available, because there's also the other side, that is, if you talk with the analyst, he will not tell you he wants everything. The analyst says, I want, in order to have good analytical products that help law enforcement to take decisions and to catch the bad guys, I want targeted information, I want high quality information, I want to deal with this information that I need to fulfill my job. And that is, if you see this information that generally is the core business of Europol, that comes from national police offices to us, is that what the analyst does at Europol? Of course, we also have the other side, which is the open sources analysis. But this is a different ballgame, because open sources analysis, and there I think it's important to have the awareness of this, what you get out of open sources analysis might not be reliable information. I think Babak made this point before. There is a completely difference in analysis of this information, the outcome of this, where you clearly have to put a stamp on the outcome and say, this might be, it's an open source information, might be not a reliable information, please investigator, be careful when you use this information. If you, Dennis, if you just allow me to make my point, because I have the three other speakers made the point about the black box, yeah, which I think on the black box within the black box. I think it is important, if law enforcement works in this area, there should be no black box that is closed to the public and to the supervisory authority. At least at Europol, for my organization, there is, you can of course talk about the black box from a technical point of view, but there must be complete transparency. What is happening, what kind of algorithms are used, and the supervision, I'm talking now about the supervision of the police organization, should have access to that information, but should be also enabled to control it, which means they have to know what kind of analytical tools the analyst takes. In fact, the supervision should be at the same knowledge state and information status as the analyst itself working it, because otherwise it's difficult to provide, also for a data protection officer, but also for supervision, an assurance that these necessary processing operations are in line with the legal framework that we have. Just one short comment, because I think that what Babak said was a very good point. He referred to military and to this idea, which I also heard very often, to say, well, the sea of data is out there. We take the data in, we analyze this, and then we think about what are we going to do that. I think that is if we talk about the big data in law enforcement, I think that is the most important point. If you start with this, you have to know why you need it, why this is relevant for you, which proportionality safeguards you apply, and is it really necessary that you do this? And if you answer this question beforehand, you will not come to this point that you say, maybe military has other data protection regulations than the European Police Office, but it would be for us impossible to arrive to that point and later to say, well, was this now proportional? Then we did something wrong already. Yeah, this agreement on what can be done with the data has to be made before with the legislator and of course with the supervisory authorities.
All right, thank you very much. I have a lot of questions, but I have also a room full of people who may also have questions, so I want to yield to the floor. Yesterday I heard a very good definition of a question. A question is a short sentence that ends in a question mark, which I really like. So I would like to invite you, if you have a question, please stand up, tell very shortly who you are, formulate a nice short sentence that ends in a question mark and direct it at one of the panelists. So over here. We do not have a... Oh, we do have a microphone. Excellent.
Tobias Mosches, Datenschutzraum. My question is, in short, is big data leading to self-fulfilling prophecies? I bring a short example.
Very short example.
Yes. For once, if you have some criteria that says they are more, there's a bigger statistic they get criminal, you more investigate these people, you will find more. And the other point is, if you investigate more of these people, they will feel treated unjust, and they do so right, and then they may radicalize themselves and get to the point they really get criminal.
Okay, and who in the panel would you like to answer this question?
Oh, it's a good question.
Yes.
I don't know.
And it was very short. Okay, so the question is, do the data and the data practices sort of have a self-reinforcing character, and does it also have social repercussions? Who would like to comment on that, maybe also shortly, by the way?
Very,
Helge
very
would,
shortly.
okay.
I think the answer is yes. This is a real threat, and of course, the more we investigate, the more we will find. And then I would really like to let the question be open. This is what we call data determinism. How much can we shape the behavior of the data subject by what we're doing as a result of our big data analytics? And I will leave that open because I really like to hear if we have any research and results on that. But the threat of data determinism is, of course, real. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm quite certain that David will be able to give you some reference for that, but that can be later. There was a question, I think the one behind you was first, yes.
I'm Pernilla Dranberg from Copenhagen. I just want to, if regulators can't go kind of control the algorithms, what else can you do? What can you do then? Are there any other measures you're talking about across data protection agencies? Like maybe self-regulation we know is not good enough, right? So I know it's secret, it's company secrets, the algorithms, but...
We're going to ask it anyway. So I'm going to direct this one to Daniel.
Well,
you already
what
talked
comes
a little.
what comes to my mind to strengthen enforcement powers by supervision would be one part, but I think what we didn't mention at all, I think this morning so far, was very detailed requirements on the audit logs. Yeah, requirements on how the processing actions have to be documented on one side, and the integrity of audit logs, and who should have access to those logs in the aftermath. So that is as far I can help.
And maybe a very short comment from Babak as well. Are there technological possibilities that can sort of be built into the systems that can increase accountability, or is that a pipe dream?
I think it's a pipe dream.
Okay, excellent.
Because no company will release, this is at the core IPR. I do not, sorry. I don't think, sorry, I hate microphones. No, I think it's a pipe dream because this is a core competitive advantage and IPR of companies, and they will not release it. Any company, even if they subscribe to digital Magna Carta, still they will not release that. And that's my view of life.
Okay, all right. Very short comment?
Very, very short comment on this. It's more of a topic on how do we supervise. Probably was the reason for this question when I said we can't really supervise the details of the algorithms. Well, we should supervise the law enforcement agencies by supervising the internal compliance work. That's how we work, and that's how we very, very often work in other privacy cases. We supervise how do the controller actually make sure the control is compliant with the regulation.
Okay, but that still leaves open also for the controller whether they can have access to the inner workings of the system. So, okay, we'll leave it at that. I have a question here at the front, then one there, and then one in the middle. Maybe we can collect the three questions and then so, yeah.
My name is Elizabeth de Leeuw. I'm an advisor in the field of IT security. I have a question.
Excellent. That's 3 minutes more than I thought I had.
I wonder, how can we enforce and monitor the principles of purpose and the principles of, well, why we have to find all these data? Because we are talking about black boxes inside the black boxes, and that's a very fundamental thing, because when we look into the black box of the big data and we do the analytics, then we never know in advance what comes out of it.
So your question is basically, is purpose limitation still viable in a big data environment?
Yes, and how do we do that?
Perfect.
If we do.
A question just behind you.
Hello, Carmela Troncoso from India Software Institute. My question is very similar, but for the principle for proportionality. So I have heard proportionality as the most often said word here, but proportionality is proportional to something. And the only something I have heard so far is to be better than the bad guys. And if I have to collect data, process data to be better than the bad guys, then everything is allowed. So I wonder how this proportionality actually fits in the discussion.
Excellent. So we have purpose limitation and proportionality in the context of big data and law enforcement. And then we had a question here in the middle, and then I'm going to head back to the panel.
Thanks, Tobias Madsen, University of Tübingen, Germany. I wanted to address the point that came up in the end of the unreliability of data. I think this is very important, but I would like to know how to address that from a regulatory perspective. So if a border control guard, for example, gets the information, that person in front of you might be suspect, but that's unreliable. What is she or he supposed to do? So there's got to be something more fixed, or from a regulatory perspective, more precise to that.
So excellent. We have three minor issues on the table. So we have the question of what about the quality of data in big data processes? As David says, data is always cooked. So it's not just the open source data that may be tainted, but other sources of data also have their own preferences. We have the question of purpose limitation, and we have the question of proportionality. Who will rise to this occasion? Babak.
Right. I'll be very brief. As soon as, in my opinion, and that's a personal opinion and it's not a representative of the law enforcement agencies which I work for, as soon as you talk about proportionality, you have to have a triangulation. At the same time as proportionality, you need to talk about the relevance and measurable within the context of investigation. So you can't just rely as a proportionality as a critical success factor of your analytics. It has to be relevant and measurable within the context. So all of them coming together as a triangulation rather than looking at the proportionality as a single bullet point or single silver bullet to solve the problem. It was as fast as I could.
That's very good. Thank you. David would like to say something.
I'm not going to address any of these questions specifically, but it does seem to me that the issue that is being raised over and over again is this. We have a situation whereby data are being collected on a massive scale and analyzed. The outcomes of those, we have seen some results from. We've seen some consequences, namely that there is evidence of extensive discriminatory practice as an outcome of those practices. There are self-fulfilling prophecies whereby certain kinds of what Zuboff would call behavioral manipulation, but some kind of influence on the persons who are being thus targeted. Now, it seems to me that if those are the kinds of consequences that we see coming out, and your question for the panel has to do with should there be regulation, then surely we have to do more than say, oh, well, actually, we can't look at inside the black box. We can't actually ask our vendors what is inside the black box. We've just got to use the thing. It seems to me that we have to ask what is inside. We have to ask questions about the construction of the algorithms. these aren't questions that we can leave on one side if we are going to do what this panel is supposed to be all about.
Okay, let me lay that back to Helge. You say, okay,
Right.
two elements. One, the element that David brought in, so we do need to be able to see inside. And the other is the framework. Does it also cover the other adverse effect of big data analysis, such as bias in the data leading maybe to discrimination, unfair treatment? Can you capture that in your role?
Oh, yeah, in 1 minute, eh? First of all, just recapturing David's thoughts. I think the free will of the black boxes is overrated. They're ordered, they're designed, and law enforcement is de facto in control, or at least they're obliged to be in control. These are data programs that's ordered and should have some specific functionality. And you do control the input, you do control the output, and you do control the use of the result. So this is where you can work on proportionality and purpose. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Next year we'll apply for a panel which is twice as long, and we'll try to do that. Please join me in thanking our panel. And thank you very much for being here, and have a nice day.